The sound of the Finnish winter is not silence. It's the rhythmic glide of skis over snow, the vapor of breath crystallizing in the frigid air, the cutting wind whistling through the trees. For two friends, Arno Hionen and Esko Viljo, this was the familiar soundtrack to the end of another day of work and training. A moment of peace and effort etched into the white, infinite landscape. They didn't know it, but that moment was a border. The last page of their lives as they were before. Because what was about to tear through the sky and descend upon them was not just a light or an object. It was an event that would leave behind more than haunted memories. It would leave scars. Today, on Alien Cases, we delve deep into a story that overflows the boundaries of a mere sighting. A narrative that becomes physical, palpable, and brutally inscribed onto the bodies of its witnesses. We will unravel the saga of Imjärvi and its disturbing echo in Kinula, a journey that forces us to ask what happens when the unknown not only reveals itself, but also touches, wounds, and transforms. Prepare yourselves, because the story that follows is a dive into the heart of a close encounter of the third kind, where wonder and pain became two sides of the same coin. Our journey begins on January 7th, 1970, in the small, rural village of Imjärvi, part of the town of Heinola in southern Finland. On this day, the world of two men would be altered forever. Arno Heinonen, a 36-year-old woodsman, and Esko Viljo, a 38-year-old farmer, were more than neighbors. They were friends and sports partners, cross-country skiers who took their training seriously. That day was a typical Wednesday. After work, around 4:15 p.m., the two geared up and glided into the hills surrounding the village, an isolated training spot they knew like the back of their hands. The air was frigid, with thermometers marking 1 degree above 0 Fahrenheit. The perfectly clear sky was beginning to be tinged with the orange hues of the imminent sunset, and the first stars dotted the darkening celestial dome. For about half an hour, they went up and down the slopes, their breath turning into clouds of vapor, the sound of their skis cutting through the snow being the only thing to break the profound silence. At 4:45 p.m., exhausted, they stopped in a clearing to catch their breath. It was a moment of peace, of camaraderie, a late afternoon ritual amidst the imposing nature. They could not have imagined that this silence was about to be shattered in a way that would defy all logic and sanity. They were in the exact right place, at the exact right time, to become the central witnesses of an event that would enter the annals of UFO history. As they rested, a subtle sound began to invade the silence. A low, almost imperceptible but persistent hum. Almost simultaneously, their eyes were drawn to the sky. An intense light, which they described as a fiery torch, was moving rapidly from the north. The hum, once faint, began to grow, becoming sharp and piercing. The light made a sharp maneuver towards the south and began to descend in their direction. The object hovered, motionless for an instant, and from it, a thick, reddish-gray mist began to emanate, spreading in a spinning motion as it fell, becoming thinner and more transparent near the ground. Then, the descent resumed, slower this time, and the object stopped at an estimated height of only 10 to 13 feet from the ground. It was so close that Arno later claimed he could have touched it with his ski poles. Paralyzed by astonishment, they could observe the craft in detail. It was a metallic-looking disc with a flat bottom and a dome on top. On the lower edge, there were 3 symmetrically spaced hemispheres, like a primitive landing gear. From the center of the base, a tube about 10 inches in diameter protruded. Suddenly, from this tube, a beam of blinding light shot downwards, illuminating a circle of snow approximately 3 feet in diameter. Where the light touched, the snow was not just illuminated. The edge of the circle was marked, almost coal-black, as if it had been cauterized. The 2 men remained frozen in place, witnesses to a spectacle their minds struggled to process. It was in this moment of awe that Arno felt something inexplicable. A force grabbed him by the waist like a firm hand and pulled him backward. As he took an instinctive step to keep from falling, his eyes locked onto the source of the action. Standing right in the middle of the light beam was a creature. It was just 3 feet tall, with arms and legs that seemed fragilely thin. Its skin was pale, white as wax. The face was dominated by a peculiar nose, described as a curved hook pointing downwards, and its ears were small, set close to a head covered by a conical metallic helmet. The creature wore a kind of light green jumpsuit, with dark green boots that went up to its knees and white gloves that reached its elbows. In its hands, which had thin, long fingers that gripped with the strength of claws, it held a black box. The box had a small, round opening from which a white light pulsed. Escovilla would later compare the device to some kind of camera. The being was positioned within the beam of light in such a way that its entire body seemed to glow like a freshly lit matchstick. Without any warning, the humanoid turned the black box towards Arno Heinonen. A light was projected onto him, and instantly the reddish-gray mist reappeared around him. From the illuminated snow, large sparks began to fly. They were like small, 4-inch cones, glowing in shades of red, green, and violet. They floated in slow, elegant curves, a mesmerizing ballet of light. Some of these sparks hit Arno and Esko. They expected the pain of a burn, but felt absolutely nothing. The beauty of the scene was so overwhelming that, for a moment, fear gave way to a strange enchantment. Meanwhile, the mist thickened rapidly to the point of completely hiding the small creature. Soon, it became so dense that Arno and Esko, though close to each other, could no longer see one another. It lasted only a few moments. The beam of light descending from the craft narrowed, was sucked upwards like a flame being extinguished, and vanished inside the object. Just as quickly, the mist dissipated. When visibility returned, there was nothing. The craft, the light, the sound, everything had vanished in a split second, as if it had never existed. The entire event, from the sighting to the disappearance, lasted no more than 2 or 3 minutes. The silence of the Finnish night returned, now heavy with the weight of the impossible. Arno and Esko stood still for several minutes, processing what had just happened. According to their testimonies, fear was not the dominant emotion, but rather a deep discomfort and an overwhelming shock. Finally, Arno decided it was time to go home and tried to take a step forward. That's when the real terror began. The right side of his body was completely numb. When he tried to put weight on his leg, it didn't respond. He collapsed into the snow. His leg was stiff, sore, and his foot felt anesthetized. Escovillo, though also feeling unwell, had to carry his incapacitated friend. For nearly 2 miles, he dragged Arno through the snow to his mother's house. The woman was shocked to see her son arrive in such a state. They laid him on the sofa and noticed that Esko's face was strangely red and swollen, something they initially attributed to the physical exertion. But the symptoms were just beginning. Shortly after, Arno began to feel excruciating pain in his back and joints, accompanied by a headache so intense it made him vomit. The most alarming symptom, however, came when he went to the bathroom. His urine came out a dark, almost black color, which he described as being like coffee. It was a clear sign that something was terribly wrong inside his body.
Esko, despite also suffering from pain and a severe headache, ran to the nearest neighbor's house, about 2,000 feet away, to use a telephone. He called the doctors on the list. The first 2, upon hearing the story, simply hung up, refusing to help. The third, Dr. Pauli Kayan Antaus, agreed to see them. Driven by a neighbor, they arrived at the clinic about an hour later. Dr. Pauli examined both men, but initially found nothing that could clinically justify their severe symptoms. His clinic, however, was poorly equipped and had no resources for blood or urine tests. He prescribed sleeping pills and painkillers, the only treatment he could offer. The doctor, however, made a crucial observation. The men seemed genuinely in a state of shock. Their accounts were consistent, and he did not believe they were lying. He even theorized that the symptoms were consistent with radiation exposure, but he had no way to prove it. The following months were hell for Arno. In addition to the pain and the dark urine that persisted for 2 months, he developed short-term memory problems and a severe imbalance that caused him to fall several times a day. He was only able to return to work in March, still plagued by headaches. Esko recovered more quickly, but suffered from facial skin issues and vision problems for days. The credibility of their story, however, would gain unexpected support. On the same night and at the same time as the encounter, at least 9 miles away, a farmer named Elna Saderi saw a strange light in the direction of the hills. And over 6 miles from there, a boy gathering firewood also witnessed the same luminous phenomenon in the sky. What they saw was not an illusion.
The story could have ended there, as an isolated and bizarre case. But the phenomenon seemed to have only just begun. A little over a year later, the echo of Imjarvi would resonate hundreds of miles away. On February 2nd, 1971, nearly 280 miles away, 2 women, Sinika and her friend Mrs. M, were driving at night when a strange light began to follow them. The light approached, paced their car, and then crossed in front of them, forcing them to stop. When the light vanished, they saw on the side of the road a 3-foot-tall creature wearing a helmet and a brownish-green suit. The being crossed the road and disappeared into the forest. Terrified, they fled. Just 3 days later, on February 5th, the main event would take place. In the forest near Kinula, about 185 miles from Imjarvi, 2 lumberjacks, 21-year-old Peter and 18-year-old Esko Hurry, were ending their workday around 3 p.m. When Peter turned off his chainsaw, the silence revealed the presence of something else. A metallic object like 2 saucers placed one on top of the other, about 16 feet in diameter with 4 legs on the bottom, was hovering over the trees. The object descended silently and landed in a clearing about 165 feet from them. A circular opening appeared on the bottom, and from it a creature emerged. The description was frighteningly familiar. 3 feet tall, a green one-piece suit, and a helmet with a visor resembling a diving mask. The being began to walk towards them with slow, bouncing movements, like an astronaut on the moon. While Peter was paralyzed by the scene, his friend, Eskohiri, who hadn't noticed anything yet, was finishing cutting a tree. Peter instinctively turned his chainsaw on and off to get his friend's attention. When Eskohiri saw the small creature approaching, his reaction was one of the most unexpected and aggressive ever recorded in ufology. For reasons he himself could never explain, he ran towards the being, his chainsaw still running and pointed forward like a weapon. Faced with the charge, the creature turned and ran back to the craft. Seeing his friend in action, Peter also ran in the same direction. As they got closer, they saw other humanoids inside the craft, which was already beginning to float, waiting for its crew member. In an act of courage or madness, Peter lunged forward and managed to grab the creature's heel just as it was entering the ship. The instant he touched it, a searing, electric pain shot through his arm, as if he had grabbed a red-hot iron. He let go immediately. The creature managed to get on board, and the craft took off at high speed, emitting a faint hum and strong gusts of wind that kicked up the snow. In seconds, it disappeared. At the sight, only the marks in the snow and the two men remained, who suffered a mild paralysis, unable to move or speak for nearly an hour. Peter's hand, which had touched the being, was left with severe wounds that took months to heal.
While the Kinula case became a media sensation, the protagonist of the first event, Arno Hieinen, continued to live his own saga. Between 1970 and 1972, he claimed to have had multiple other contacts. He described encounters with a female humanoid who appeared young, but allegedly confided in him that she was 180 years old. She communicated perfectly in Finnish and seemed to float rather than walk. Arno claimed that after these contacts, he developed psychic abilities, becoming a clairvoyant and a healer. Stranger still, people close to him noticed a physical change. He seemed to have grown almost 10 years younger. This part of his story, of course, is what generates the most skepticism, and many researchers believe it weakens the credibility of the original event. However, it is an inseparable part of the legacy left by the encounter in that frozen clearing.
In the end, what truly remains are not just the lights in the sky, but the marks on the ground and on the skin. The saga of Imjärvi and Kinula forces us to look beyond the phenomenon and face the human element. Arno, Esko, Peter, they weren't just spectators. They were unwilling participants in a cosmic drama whose rules they did not know. Their lives became the collision point between the fantastically strange and the brutally real. It's easy to get lost in the details of the craft or the creature's appearance, but the real enigma, perhaps, lies in Arno's pain, in his fragmented memory, in the dark urine his body expelled like a poison. It's in the desperate, instinctive act of Eskohiri, who charged with a chainsaw against the unknown, a gesture of fury, fear, or pure disbelief. The great question that hangs over the snows of Finland is not just what did they see, but what was done to them. What happens when an ordinary man, a lumberjack, a farmer, has his reality fractured so violently? Arno's later life, with his supposed psychic abilities and continued contacts, might be seen as proof of a hoax by some. But couldn't it also be the journey of a mind desperately trying to make sense of something that shattered his understanding of the world? A burden or a twisted gift born from an inexplicable trauma? And this is where I turn to you. For you, where does the evidence end and the personal, solitary journey of a witness begin? Which detail of this Finnish saga resonated most strongly with you? The silent terror of Arno, paralyzed in the snow? Or the desperate fury of Esko with his chainsaw? Deep down, is the story of Imjärvi and Kinnula about visitors, or is it about survivors? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Dialogue is the tool we use to illuminate the shadows. And if this investigative journey made sense to you, if you believe these stories need to be told with the seriousness and depth they deserve, consider leaving a like. Here at Alien Cases, each like isn't a number for an algorithm. It's our way of saying as a community that we are paying attention, that these voices, however distant and strange they may seem, have found a place to be heard. Thank you for keeping the flame of curiosity burning with us. Until the next enigma.